And then I'm going to just briefly introduce our main guest for today. But Jenn and Patricio. So Jenn Steinfeld is a passionate advocate for racial, gender, and economic equity and works at the intersection of policy and action. And after 20-year career in policy advocacy around LGBTQ, HIV, and gender issues, Jenn made a pivot to helping cities use racial justice lens to build more inclusive economies and build more robust civic engagement. And they're not sure yet what this project will evolve into, but today's webinar is just the start. So you all should know that this work should live on, not only through Jenn, but through all of you too. So consider this the start, and we'll definitely provide ways later for you to keep in touch with us. So, and we have Patricio Fernández Chadwick, who is a journalist, political analyst, and writer. He served as a member of the Constitutional Convention from 2021 to 2022, representing the 11th District of the Santiago Metropolitan Region, where he coordinated the Committee on Communications, Information, and Transparency. And we don't have this in our thing, but that is in Chile. So I should probably say a word about that. So a little bit about this project. I mean, we're going to start our time with Jenn, who's going to share some of the key findings from the project and lay the foundation for this collective conversation we hope to have with you all and to spark further conversations going forward. Jenn will then bring in Patricio for a conversation about lessons learned from Chile's fairly recent constitutional process and what that can reveal to all of us about democratic participation, shared governance, and collective capacity. And then we'll open up for Q&A and discussion, as I mentioned earlier. Feel free to drop questions in the chat at any time, and our team will gather those and sort of bring them into the fold and try to cover as much of that ground as we possibly can. And we will also be sure to share the full paper with you. We're ready to publish that and let everybody dig in and start rolling with it. So we'll be sure to share the paper with you towards the end of the conversation. And we will then, we'll also, of course, follow that up in email with a link to it. So again, make sure you have your Zoom interpretation settings on so that you don't miss any content from Jenn and Patricio in particular. So I think we'll make sure our Think Big slides are down. And I'm going to now turn this over to Jenn to talk about this super cool project and what we've learned and what we think this work needs to look like going forward.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Elaine, for that wonderful introduction. And I am really excited to be with you all today. I'm going to share some slides with you all. So this project came out of a lot of conversations over a long period of time. And starting in 2024, I remember preparing for the tax cuts fight that was coming up. And I thought, wow, 1776 and 2025 are really good years to be a rich white man who doesn't want to pay your taxes. And I thought, we've kind of stretched independence to its limits. And how do we create more interdependence for the next 250 years? So I'll talk more about the paper, but I want to start with you the same way that I started with all of my interviewees. I want you to remember a time that you worked together with other people to achieve a shared goal. And just take a minute with that experience. What sensations or emotions or memories come to mind? And most of all, what made that possible? And I invite you to share in the chat some of those conditions that made it possible for you to work collaboratively to achieve a shared goal. And one of the reasons that I'm beginning here, again, this is where I started every interview for the project, because before I was asking people about what was broken, I wanted to hear from people about when collaboration actually worked. And I heard amazing stories about, church bake sales that people put on a shoestring. I heard from somebody who was part of a World Cup racing team and the ability to focus completely on work and then just his own reflection that rarely happens for things that really matter the way that we do the single-mindedness. I think, as we're looking at the World Cup in soccer right now, looking at that focus that people are able to put into sporting events and the resources that they get to be able to do that. So I'm just going to look in the chat a little bit, and I'm seeing some themes here, some flexibility, shared purpose, shared values, trust. These are all capacities that really came through in my interviews, and we'll talk more through these later. But really, just some of it is about just having space to engage with conflict, with challenges, with difficulty together, and to really dig in together and try to explore that in a community that will hold you through that tension. So, this was the big question. What allows people to work together towards a shared goal? And I had conversations with people working in democracy, in philanthropy, in organizing, through worker ownership, in care and journalism, and movement building spaces. And I expected really different answers across these different sectors, but instead I kept hearing incredibly similar stories. Across sectors, people kept describing these same conditions of fragmentation, of urgency, of scarcity, of distrust, and that difficulty of sustaining collaboration over time. That convergence really surprised me. So the convergence really eventually led me to ask a different question. And instead of saying, why isn't collaboration working? I found myself asking, what conditions can actually make collaboration possible? And that shift led me to one central insight that we are asking people to collaborate, to participate democratically, and to share power without building any of the conditions that make those things possible. And at some point, I realized that what I was hearing wasn't 20 different problems. I was hearing one underlying pattern, and that became the organizing idea for this entire project. So, as I listened across all of these interviews, I kept trying to make sense of where these patterns belonged. And some of what people were describing had to do with the stories that we tell, which is how we understand ourselves and each other and what's possible. And some of it had to do with institutions, incentives, policies, and how power and resources are distributed in our society. And some of it had to do with what people actually do together every day, how we facilitate meetings, how we navigate disagreement, how we build trust, sharing leadership, and making decisions. And so, again, eventually I realized this wasn't three separate conversations, but it was three dimensions of the same challenge. And so what began to emerge is that interdependence requires alignment across these three dimensions. So again, narrative, which shapes how we understand ourselves, one another, and really helps us to identify what kinds of futures feel possible. The structures, the institutional and material conditions within which participation happens. And then practice, which is, excuse me, how we actually learn to work together. That's where we build trust, navigate conflict, share power, and make collective decisions. And so the key insight from this is that none of these are sufficient on their own. That narrative without structural change can create an aspiration without any material impact. That structural change without practice can produce participation without any shared capacity. And that practice without supportive narratives or institutions can remain isolated and difficult to sustain. So, interdependence isn't any one of these dimensions. It's what emerges when they begin to reinforce each other. And one of the reasons that I wanted Patricio to join us today is that the Chilean constitutional process illustrates something that I think is often misunderstood. That participation is absolutely essential, but participation by itself isn't sufficient. The practices and conditions that support democratic life matter just as much. So, if that's the framework, the next question becomes, what does it actually take to build these capacities in practice? And these are some of the conditions that emerged across sectors. People described remarkably similar conditions. Wow, I should have brought my cough drops down. I'm so sorry. Give me one moment, please. So across sectors, we had people describing remarkably similar conditions. They weren't asking for one new program or one better message. They were describing the kinds of environments in which collective agency becomes possible. So again, some of these conditions end up being relational, right? They're trust, it's care, and shared purpose. Um, these are things that let us to work together in relationship with each other. Some are about opportunities for democratic practice, participation, disagreement, shared decision making. I saw all of these things come through in the chat today. So you'll see a remarkable alignment here within this group as well. And some are opportunities for organizational support, so coordination, time, and people talked a fair amount about skilled facilitation to get across difference and to really help people navigate those challenges. I think we all know that frameworks can be useful, but they're only really valuable if they help us to understand real experience. So, when I had an opportunity to go to Chile and to speak to people who were part of their constitutional process, I jumped at the chance. And I wanted Patricio to come today to give us an opportunity to test these ideas against one of these most ambitious democratic experiments in recent history. So I got to interview Patricio in January, and Nuria was our translator there. So it's wonderful to be back in conversation with them. And I asked him to join me today because our conversation in Chile made me think differently about this work. And I wanted you to be able to share in our conversation today. And who knows where it's going to take us. So I'm going to stop sharing slides, and maybe I'm going to stop sharing slides. And Patricio, I think we will just open it up and be in conversation. So my first question for you, with my gratitude for you for being here today, is that when Chile began your constitutional process, there was enormous public participation, and there was a tremendous sense of hope. Looking back, what do you think that moment got right?
Would well, first of all, Jens, thank you so much for the invitation. Really appreciate it. It's a pleasure to be here with you and with all of you. And I'm sorry because I don't speak English, but I feel more comfortable doing that in Spanish. I know that I can be more precise explaining what we have experienced here in Chile. I've been part of this constituent story of Chile since 2015. That was when Michelle Bachelet, in the second government, invited to a process of citizenship participation. What for? To start talking and discussing a new constitution. She invited me to be part of the observators group of citizens that was in charge to guarantee somehow the transparency and what to do things right somehow, to have a good dialogue session. This was a previous stage to the constitution process as such that was observed in the year 2021, 2022 in Chile. Back then, when Michelle Bachelet was in the government, we had conversations at a local level, and almost 250,000 people took part of those conversations. Conversations that were given in a spontaneous manner at home, in the clubs, in the schools, and in different spaces where people got together to discuss some of the items that for them were more important concerning this, of course, constitutional agreement. That process ended up with some discussions and with a project of constituency that was seen for the first time and was never discussed. And that stopped there and had no further presence because Piñera won the elections and finished that idea of having a new constitution. Somehow, that triumph contained the information of not being interested in this constitution, but not long before that, after that, sorry, a social riot was produced in Chile that took place and was part of all the political parties, was critical of all the previous governments, and somehow that was against all the political parties. And the agreement of all the political world in the year 2020, 2019, 2020 was precisely to deliver to the people the construction of an agreement, the creation of an agreement, where all these problems that were being moved around due to these riots were agreed as one. And that 80%, back then, 80% of the Chileans voted for a constituent process to work on a new constitution. And an 80% as well voted because that constituent process was not taken by the parliament, was taken by a constituent assembly where could be present independent parties, social groups, etc. And back then, without doubt, we had a participation, we have a will to participate that was very intense. All the intellectual parties were part. They published many quantities, many books, talking about water, talking about social rights, talking about diversity, generic diversities, subjects, indigenous rights as well. But it turned out to be that constituent assembly never grouped political parties, but objectives in partial groups. Some of them defended local interests, specific objectives, private matters, as the ones I mentioned before. And when the moment arrived, when they had to get together in the constituent process that had as a great invitation the inclusion, that is the great promise of this process, but also inviting others, inviting those that historically never took decisions, never made any part of any important decision. When that happened, those that those for the first time arrived to a power location excluded those that were coming from more historical sites, taking powerful decisions. That is, the militants of political parties, right-wing participants, more conservative parties. That is, they replicated that exclusion. So what happened? A lack of communication was produced, a large one, and a lack of capacity to listen to the others. In my dream, in that constituent process, was the wish of the liberation. What do I mean by that? When everything was so brand new, when the constituency of a dictatorship has to be left behind the constituency of Pinochet, and we had the chance to generate a new agreement, a new political and cultural agreement in a time of great transformations. What happened is that people, they were never listened. Those that arrived there, they were grouped like one with thinking about their own private matters, and that those that seemed alike turned out to be just a problem, because they were all different, instead of showing up with the curiosity of listening to the others. So just to put an end to this first answer, those that arrived, there were not militants of political parties, but they represented objectives and water, indigenous rights, social rights, sexual diversities, etc. They always said that they represented their territories, and they always arrived with the belief that they represented a participation that was social. That for what you were able to see as the process moved on is that this participation was between groups of friends or just people that had other contacts, and that participation never looked for that we should be looking in the sense of what participation really means. Just listening to the others, what the others think, what do the others group think. That's the important part about the participation, and that excluded everything: the constituent process, at the end generated a lack of dialogue, of groups that never listened to each other. They never gave themselves the time, and those that were margin, they wanted to impose their will, facing others that were considered to be the representatives of the historical power. What people requested in that process from the very beginning until the end was the construction, the creation of an agreement. But that what people requested was not being listened, was never listened to. And the process that had up to 80% of Chilean citizens that wanted to move on with that was rejected by more than 60% of the population, I would say, precisely because they never reached an agreement. Then we had another process that was taken by the political parties, was in hands on the most hard right wing, and was also rejected.
Mm. Well, thank you. That's really powerful to hear. I think you answered some of my next question, but one of the themes that emerged from this project overall is that participation alone is not enough. And I think you saw that in your process, that bringing all of these groups together alone, that's not sufficient. People also need those opportunities to practice deliberation, to navigate disagreement, the skills to make a difficult collective decision where they're working together. And so I'm wondering, having been part of the experience that you were part of, if you were designing now, what would you add to the process?
In your study, there's something that you just introduced that is very central. In Chile, we have experienced that. It is not enough to have the will to participate, to be part of something. And the story of the participation and the inclusion is not necessary. It's important to generate the conditions so that participation can work on something.
Mm.
What have I experienced? I did experience I did experience a lot of despair in the Chilean process, because when the constituent process took place, when I was chosen as part of the constituent parties that were going to constitute the constitution, it was stated that process to last 1 year, no more than that. But at the same time, an important part of that year took part in organizing in an internal level how the agreements were going to be taken, how the commissions were going to be constituted, how we were going to divide the tasks. This Constituent Assembly, in fact, was never intended to have previous standards already defined. And in the remaining time, we had to take agreements in order to fulfill a legal framework that was very complex. Those that were there, we never even had almost time to have conversations among us. Each group united and gathered with the members of the same group to defend belief, to defend that against us. But we never had the opportunity for the different political and cultural words to debate the will, to listen, and to just leaving themselves, not acting in order to be convinced of something different. At some point, I thought that was a big fantasy, of course, but at the end of the process, probably a good experiment would have been to leave locked those that were in that convention, to leave them locked before and after, and having given some time in order to obtain a proposal. I mean, not letting them move on or leave a room without working on an agreement as a real group. Because what happened? We had a social and cultural representation. Politically speaking, that had a real lack of balance, because the left wing had a stronger representation more than the right wing. I'm saying left wing but I mean the addition of some causes that among them they never probably wanted the same. But if we have to put a name to the parties, we would say they were left wing, or so they felt. And another interesting thing that I would like to mention and underline its importance of is that the groups, their beliefs and how they feel part of a group and they will to remain so, was guided by the most radical. The most radical were always with the most radical, the most moderate, and those that wanted to create a sort of balanced ambience, they got together with the same. The fanatics that wanted to defend the water. They felt like the most radical feminists, and the most radical feminists, they felt comfortable with the revolutionary, the communists, to say it somehow. But those that were ready to listen, to deliver the details, they got together with them at the same time. But that dream, like what I wanted to do, locking a room with all together until we had an agreement, was never fulfilled. And if something is missing, it's time. Let me tell you that. I can tell you that part of the problems of the difficulties to work on some agreements is related with the logic of the social network and the speed with which a social network is moving on, is developing, and is working. The decision is substituted by the emotion because reflection needs time, and emotion is already there and is instantaneous. The convention needed time.
So outside of Chile, I think people look at your process primarily in terms of it succeeded, it failed, very simple terms. But what do you think the rest of the world misunderstands about what happened internally within Chile?
I believe that what should happen in the rest of the world is not very different to what happened in Chile when we had to evaluate the constituent process. And I'm sorry about that. Why? Because without doubt, as you say, we have evaluated things only in terms of failure and success, and we have evaluated something and things as an observed exercise, an exercise that is a bit ridiculous, that is like not serious at all. We had a representation that was very new, and we had members that were strange, that were very far away behavior, that were given in the formalities of power. People that became famous because they were disguised in during the riots. There was people that became famous, they turned to be members conviction because they represented the most terrible, the popular sectors. And all of that turned out to deliver a social representation that was. But at the same time, there was a lot of inexperience in the decision taking. I believe that the long process, the long constituent process that ended up in a failure, in a terrible failure. This process starts from the dialogues of Michelle Bachelet in the year 2015 up to the result of the second constituent process, the second rejection in the year 2023. Because we forget that in Chile, we had 3 attempts. We had the dialogues of Michelle Bachelet. We also had the convention when I was taking part, where we give this diversity that we're talking about. And you can only regret your failure, because that was an incredible opportunity, and that was something that doesn't happen often, to generate a new agreement, full of participation, diverse, culturally rich, socially inclusive. But that was ruled by vanities, by private wishes, private objectives, and I would say for the lack of capacity of being curious about the others, about what was really going on. And it turned out to be rejected by a wide and large quantity of citizens. And then we had another constituent process that is almost forgotten. There was a reaction to the first one, and that had a great majority of members of the right wing. And that second process, the second constituent process, had as a leader to Jose Cast, that is the current president of Chile. It is a reactionary conservator, a member of these new right wings that we are observing all over the world. And I believe that one of the best learnings that we can see is that every will to create new foundations is destined to failure. And even when you have the idea that you want to fight for a new world and deserves a new agreement, it turns out to be more recommendable to be adjusting things, because we have time before we generate changes. And let me put an end to my answer, my long answer. I'm stuck with the lack of time that we had, because for that we need mechanisms, but we need time. Most of all, we need time, because in short periods, the common space with the other is not going to be achieved. If brief periods of life is more effective, the distinction that the construction of something in common. And the new time is applied to the transformations, not to the refundations. And that was without doubt a lesson of why reformism can turn out to be more productive than revolution.
Sure. Patricio, one of the things I appreciated so much about our conversation in January is that you bring both a local and a global perspective. And so I know that we're seeing, as you said, around the world, many countries are grappling with this polarization, with a declining trust in all sorts of institutions, and with a rise of right-wing and authoritarian rule. And so I'm wondering what lessons from Chile, both positive things we can learn and also cautionary lessons we might draw from your experience that you hope that people will carry forward.
Well, I've been part of this Chilean process, as you know, but I'm also a journalist and a reporter that travels all over Latin America on a permanent basis. I came back from Colombia just recently, and I've been paying close attention to the Argentinian process as well. I know very well what happened in Ecuador. Why I'm saying this? Because it's something that I've been able to check and confirm the speeches of the new right wings and the electoral discussions and political discussions that are taking place in all these countries in Latin America are dealing with subjects, with electoral promises of these right wings, and these are practically identical. Abelardo, for example, of the Esprella in Colombia, promises and says practically the same that Jose Antonio Gas said in Chile. Being countries that are very different with different realities. What do I get from Chile in this discussion? What do I rescue? Gabriel Boric was not Petro. José Antonio Castro, is not Abelardo. And I say this in a good way. The Chilean version is more institutional. When the riots took place in the 2019, the end of those riots was agreed by a constitution, and we discussed them in the old building of the Chilean Congress founded in the 19th century. The riots in Chile never ended, as the Colombians said, going to the mountain and fighting. No, that ended in an effort to institutionalize. That will, that has failed, that never reached any good point in Chile, is still a framework very strong. Problems are solved institutionally. The democracy is contained in institutions. It's not only a matter of shouting out loud as much as you can. This is what I would rescue, but at the same time, it's something that I regret. And it's this effort, this progressive effort that moved the policy and the Chilean culture in the last 10 years has had it's missing time and it's late already. The great subjects that moved the real constitution have disappeared. They were the social rights. Who are we going to commit to for all the citizens? The new situation of women in the decision taking and in the participation. The cultural diversities, the indigenous, the different worlds that live together, how they're going to be recognized, the ecology, how we're going to consider a world that is coming with these new ecologics.
Gracias. Nuria, I think your audio may have cut out at the end there, but Patricio, are you hearing Nuria now? Okay, I hear you and not Nuria as well. So my last question is open to you. Is there anything you wish that I had asked or anything else you would like us to know about Chile today? Oh, it's back. Give me one moment. She was out. She got bumped out, I think, and she's returning. So we'll give her a minute to. Okay, that's okay. Hold on, let me just give Nuria the question so she knows what we're talking about. Nuria, just open-ended question to Patricio about is there anything else that he wishes that I had asked or anything else he would like us all to know about Chile today? Más espacio, por favor.
Yes. There was something that I believe is virtuous, is full of virtue, and we turn out to have an agreement or work on an agreement for the times that are coming, for these 250 years that you're talking about. And that was not good at all. One of the things that I believe are more important in considering is the agreement that we wanted to construct, to work on, and was never achieved, was done in times of new technology. I had a big presence, the social network, and that happened in that discussion. And many of those that were there, instead of talking to the colleagues of convention, constituent convention, talked to their own followers in the cell phones. Many times we had discussions that were taking place in the constituent process that were very permeated by the fury waves that were in Twitter back then. Why do I mention this? Because one of the challenges that we have ahead is that the new technologies of communication, of course, are coming, and they were a dream to meet. Why? Because they turn out to be a place of algorithms. And there's something also to request to technology in order to generate the solution to that same problem that they caused. I believe that also ahead we have a set of work that is political and technological to invent solutions that are technical, that are technological, and that are part of the common objective and not the dissociation. This is just it's an opinion what I say, because I don't have the skills nor the knowledge to develop that. But I believe there's a challenge there, that interdependence that you're looking for in your work, Jenn. I believe that is a technological challenge as well. How do we work on the mechanisms today that are lived in the virtuality so that interdependence is possible, or even more possible, that the very same interdependence and confrontation? And those that know about that, they're already working on that and they're already researching that.
Well, thank you so much, Patricio, for your generosity and sharing your experience and your time, and for having me into your home when I was visiting. And thank you to Nuria again for making this conversation possible. And they will be with us throughout the Q&A. So I want to encourage anyone who has questions, please do put them in the chat. And I hope that, yeah. And I hope that you all can hear that this was not simply a story about Chile, but it's a reminder or a case study that democracy asks something of us as individuals, as well as of our institutions. So I have one last slide for you all before I turn my piece over, which is just to say that sometimes we get hung up on the wrong question, but this is not a question of whether or not we are interdependent. We are interdependent. And the question is whether we will build the conditions to live that reality well. And we're talking here about an ecosystem, about conditions that are relational, about conditions that are organizational, and conditions that are democratic. And together, these create the environment in which collective agency becomes possible. So I hope that you all will forgive me that I did not just take you through the paper itself. You're all smart people. I know that Elaine is going to tell you where to find it. And I tried to make it really accessible. So there's a very long paper, but there's also a short executive summary that you can read and some appendices about these practice conditions. What are the things we can actually be doing now to build our capacities to be able to live this practice of interdependence? And I hope that you will explore those things further. And I hope that you will stay for the Q&A and ask us any questions that you want. And I'll pass it over to Elaine.
Thank you, Jenn. Y gracias, Patricio y Nuria. Yes, we are going to share the link to the paper now. And Jenn, the paper's fantastic. And yes, it does have some link to it, but I want people to know it's also incredibly actionable. Like, it's just also, I think it's a great balance of sort of kind of foundational and theoretical, but very practical too. So it's really terrific. So we're dropping that in now, and hope everybody will take time to really dig into it, share it with others, send questions, things you're excited about, things. Yeah, so please. We really want to know what you think. So my colleague Sabina, I think, is dropping that in the link and a short event evaluation form. So now let's get into our question and answer. I mean, I know we have, hopefully folks can stick around to the top of the hour, but we're going to keep the room open till 15 minutes after the top of the hour so we can keep the conversation going, because obviously this is important and dense, and we learned a lot already, both from Jenn and Patricio, that's worth digging into. So I think we can stop the recording as far as the formal event, because we'll share around the sort of presentations and comments from Patricio later.